What happens when a simple morning show interview turns into a complete meltdown on live television? When a guest's carefully crafted public image crumbles in real time, exposing years of buried resentment and controversy. Today, we're breaking down one of the most shocking moments in morning television history, where best-selling author Brandon Lake completely lost his composure during what was supposed to be a routine book promotion on the Today Show. This wasn't just another awkward celebrity moment. This was a full-blown explosion that had viewers glued to their screens and social media buzzing for weeks. Before we dive into this incredible breakdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments what you think really triggered Brandon's outburst. Because trust me, there's more to this story than meets the eye. The Today Show studio was buzzing with its usual morning energy as Hoda Kotb prepared for what seemed like another standard author interview. Brandon Lake, the acclaimed writer behind 3 consecutive New York Times bestsellers, was scheduled to discuss his latest novel, a psychological thriller that had already sparked controversy for its dark themes and explicit content. What nobody expected was that the real thriller would unfold right there in Studio 1A. Hoda opened the segment with her trademark warmth. We're here with best-selling author Brandon Lake, whose new book has everyone talking. Good morning, Brandon. Thank you for being here. Brandon shifted in his chair, already seeming slightly agitated. Thanks for having me, Hoda. Though, I have to say I'm curious about how you're going to handle this interview, given some of the things I've been hearing. The comment caught Hoda off guard, her smile faltering for just a moment. I'm not sure what you mean. We're just here to talk about your book. Are we though? Brandon's voice carried a sharp edge. Because I've done about 15 interviews this week, and somehow every single one has turned into an interrogation about my personal life instead of focusing on my actual work. Hoda maintained her professional composure. Well, when you write books that deal with such intense psychological themes, readers naturally become curious about what inspires you. Your latest novel deals with trauma, family secrets, and some pretty dark territory. Right. And that's exactly the problem. Brandon leaned forward, his hands gripping the armrests of his chair. Everyone wants to psychoanalyze the author instead of analyzing the work. My book stands on its own merit. Of course it does, Hoda replied. But you have to admit, the parallels between your protagonist's childhood and some of the details you've shared about your own upbringing in previous interviews are quite striking. Brandon's jaw tightened. What parallels exactly? Because I'm getting really tired of journalists trying to turn my fiction into some kind of autobiography. Hoda consulted her notes, clearly trying to steer the conversation back to safer ground. Your protagonist deals with abandonment issues and has a complicated relationship with authority figures. In your 2019 interview with Publishers Weekly, you mentioned growing up without your father and struggling with teachers who didn't understand your creative process. That was 5 years ago, Brandon snapped. And I was going through therapy at the time. I was probably oversharing, trying to be authentic or whatever. But that doesn't mean every character I write is me. The tension was becoming palpable as Hoda pressed on. I think readers connect with authors who are willing to be vulnerable about their experiences. Vulnerable? Brandon's voice rose slightly. Is that what we're calling it? Because it feels more like exploitation to me. Every time I try to discuss craft, technique, or the actual literary merit of my work, interviewers want to dig into my childhood trauma like it's some kind of entertainment. Hoda could sense the interview spiraling. Brandon, I certainly don't mean to make you uncomfortable. Let's talk about your writing process, then. How do you develop these complex psychological profiles for your characters? Through research, imagination, and years of studying human behavior, Brandon replied tersely. Not through some kind of therapeutic word vomiting about my personal issues, which seems to be what everyone expects from authors these days. But surely your life experiences inform your writing in some way, Hoda persisted. Most authors draw from their own emotional experiences to create authentic characters. Brandon stared at her for a long moment. You know what, Hoda? I thought the Today Show might be different. I thought maybe we could have an intelligent conversation about literature, about storytelling, about the craft of writing. But apparently, even here we have to turn everything into trauma porn. The studio fell silent except for the hum of cameras, and Hoda knew she was losing control of the interview. Hoda took a deep breath, her years of live television experience kicking in as she tried to salvage what was quickly becoming a disaster. Brandon, I apologize if you feel like we're not focusing on your work. That's certainly not my intention. Your books have sold millions of copies precisely because they resonate with people on a deep emotional level. Don't patronize me, Brandon shot back, his composure completely gone now. You think I don't know what you're doing? You have your little producer notes there telling you exactly which buttons to push, which wounds to poke at. This isn't journalism. It's tabloid sensationalism disguised as literary discussion. Hoda's professional mask was starting to crack. I have to say, I'm surprised by your reaction. Most authors appreciate the opportunity to discuss how their personal experiences shape their creative work. Most authors? Brandon laughed bitterly. You mean most authors are willing to perform their trauma for your audience's entertainment? Well, I'm not most authors. And I'm certainly not going to sit here and pretend that my father walking out when I was 8 somehow makes me qualified to write about complex psychological themes. Nobody's asking you to pretend anything, Hoda replied, her voice taking on a firmer tone. But you did write extensively about abandonment in this book, and you've spoken publicly about your father before. I spoke about it once in one interview because the interviewer caught me off guard, and I was feeling particularly raw that day. Brandon's hands were gesturing wildly now. And now it's become this thing that follows me around like a scarlet letter. Every interview, every review, every discussion about my work somehow circles back to daddy issues. Hoda glanced at her producer off camera, who was making frantic gestures, clearly torn between cutting to commercial and letting this train wreck. Brandon, I think you're being a bit unfair. We're having a conversation about your book, which does deal with themes of family dysfunction and emotional trauma. It deals with those themes because they're universal human experiences, Brandon snapped. Not because I'm working out my personal demons on the page. Do you think Stephen King writes horror because he's a psychopath? Do you think Gillian Flynn writes about toxic relationships because she's had toxic relationships? Sometimes writers write about dark things because dark things make for compelling stories. Not because we're all walking wounded trying to heal ourselves through fiction. That's a fair point, Hoda conceded. But surely you can understand why readers might be curious about the connection between an author's life and their work. Curious? Yes. Brandon leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with sarcasm. But what you're doing isn't curiosity. It's voyeurism. You want me to bleed for your cameras? To give your viewers some juicy backstory they can use to explain away the complexity of my writing. God forbid people actually engage with the text itself instead of reducing everything to amateur psychology. The studio was dead quiet now, crew members exchanging uncomfortable glances as Hoda struggled to regain control. I don't think that's what we're doing here at all. The Today Show has always been about connecting with our guests on a human level. Connecting? Brandon's voice was rising again. Is that what you call it when you ambush someone with questions about their childhood trauma? When you treat their personal pain like it's some kind of marketing tool? Because that's exactly what this feels like, Hoda. It feels like you're trying to extract something from me that I never agreed to give. Hoda's patience was wearing thin. Brandon, with all due respect, you're a public figure who chose to share details about your life in previous interviews. We're not ambushing you with anything that isn't already part of the public record. The public record, Brandon repeated mockingly. Right, because once you say something in an interview, it belongs to everyone forever. It becomes fair game for every journalist to pick apart and psychoanalyze. Do you have any idea what it's like to watch strangers on the internet dissect your childhood and theorize about your mental health based on a few offhand comments you made years ago? I imagine that would be difficult, Hoda replied, though her tone suggested her sympathy was limited. But that comes with the territory of being a successful author, doesn't it? Public interest in your personal life is part of the package. Brandon stared at her in disbelief. Part of the package? My personal trauma is part of the package? The worst moments of my childhood are just collateral damage in the pursuit of book sales? Do you even hear yourself right now? Hoda's expression hardened, her famous warmth completely gone now. Brandon, I think you need to take a step back here. You're being incredibly hostile to someone who's simply doing her job. We invited you on this show to promote your book, and frankly, your behavior right now is completely unprofessional. Unprofessional. Brandon's voice cracked with incredulous laughter. You want to talk about unprofessional? How about ambushing your guests with psychological analysis they never signed up for? How about turning what should be a literary discussion into a therapy session for your viewers' entertainment? We are not ambushing you. Hoda shot back, her composure finally breaking. And I resent the implication that I would do something like that to a guest. I've been doing this for over 20 years, And I've never had an author react this way to perfectly reasonable questions about their work. Perfectly reasonable? Brandon was on his feet now, pacing behind his chair like a caged animal. You think it's perfectly reasonable to dig into someone's childhood abandonment issues on national television? You think it's perfectly reasonable to psychoanalyze a complete stranger based on their fiction? Sit down, Brandon, Hoda commanded, her voice sharp with authority. You're making a scene. I'm making a scene? Brandon whirled around to face her. I'm making a scene by refusing to participate in your exploitation? By standing up for myself and every other artist who's been reduced to a walking trauma case by journalists who can't be bothered to actually read their work. The producer was now frantically signaling to cut to commercial, but Hoda waved him off, clearly determined to see this through. You know what, Brandon? Maybe the problem isn't with the questions. Maybe the problem is that you can't handle honest discussion about your own work. Maybe you're so defensive because there's truth in what people are saying about the connections between your life and your writing. Brandon stopped pacing, his face flushing red. Did you just psychoanalyze me on live television? Did you just prove my entire point by doing exactly what I've been complaining about? I'm trying to understand why you're so angry, Hoda replied, though her voice was shaking slightly. Because this level of rage seems completely disproportionate to the situation. Disproportionate. Brandon's voice was reaching dangerous levels. You want to know why I'm angry, Hoda? I'm angry because I've spent 15 years perfecting my craft, studying literature, developing my voice as a writer, and all anyone wants to talk about is my daddy issues. I'm angry because I can't go to a single interview without someone trying to turn me into a case study. But why is that such a bad thing? Hoda pressed. Why is it so threatening to acknowledge that your personal experiences might influence your creativity? Because it reduces everything I've worked for to amateur psychology. Brandon slammed his hand on the armrest of his chair. Because it implies that my success is just therapy disguised as literature. Because it suggests that readers aren't connecting with my work. They're just connecting with my trauma. Hoda leaned forward aggressively. Maybe that's exactly what's happening, Brandon. Maybe people aren't reading your books for the literary merit you're so proud of. Maybe they're reading them because they recognize their own pain in your characters. The words hit Brandon like a physical blow. For a moment, the studio was completely silent. The only sound the hum of television equipment and the distant murmur of crew members whispering to each other. How dare you? Brandon whispered, his voice barely audible but filled with venom. How dare you dismiss 15 years of my life's work like that? I'm not dismissing anything, Hoda replied, but her voice lacked conviction now. I'm just suggesting that maybe you're not as separate from your work as you want to believe. You know what the real tragedy is here, Hoda? Brandon's voice was eerily calm now, more terrifying than his earlier shouting. The real tragedy is that you probably think you're helping. You probably think this kind of invasive, exploitative questioning is somehow serving your audience. But what you're actually doing is destroying the magic of storytelling. I don't understand what you mean, Hoda said, though she looked like she was beginning to regret pushing him this far. You're teaching people that stories don't matter unless they're autobiographical, Brandon continued, his voice growing stronger. You're telling them that imagination is worthless, that creativity is just disguised confession. You're reducing the entire art of fiction to nothing more than expensive therapy. That's not what I'm doing at all, Hoda protested. But Brandon wasn't finished. You're right, Hoda. That's not what you think you're doing. Brandon's voice was dangerously quiet. But that's exactly what you're accomplishing. And the worst part is you don't even realize it. You sit there in your comfortable chair with your comfortable salary, asking comfortable questions that make people uncomfortable, and you think that makes you a journalist. Hoda's face was flushed with anger. Now I don't have to sit here and listen to you attack my professionalism. I've interviewed presidents, world leaders, Nobel Prize winners, and none of them have ever behaved the way you're behaving right now. Maybe because none of them were stupid enough to be vulnerable with you, Brandon shot back, his calm facade cracking again. Maybe they were smart enough to keep their personal lives personal, instead of making the mistake I made of trusting a journalist with something real. You're being completely unreasonable, Hoda snapped. And frankly, I'm starting to wonder if this outburst is just a publicity stunt for your book. The accusation hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Brandon's face went completely white, then red, then white again as he processed what she had just said. A publicity stunt, he repeated slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. You think this is a publicity stunt? I'm just saying, Hoda continued, apparently oblivious to how far she had just pushed him. Authors have been known to create controversy to drive sales. Your book does deal with explosive topics, and this kind of dramatic television moment certainly gets people talking. Brandon stood up so abruptly that his chair rolled backward and hit the wall behind him with a loud crash that made everyone in the studio jump. Get people talking? His voice was rising to a shout again. You think I would humiliate myself on national television? You think I would expose my deepest insecurities and childhood trauma as a marketing strategy? Are you completely insane? Brandon, please sit down. Hoda tried to regain control, but it was far too late for that. No, I will not sit down. Brandon was pacing again, his hands shaking with rage. You want to know what's really happening here, Hoda? You want to know why I'm so angry? It's because people like you have made it impossible for artists to exist without being dissected like laboratory specimens. That's not true, Hoda protested. But Brandon wasn't listening anymore. Every book I write, every story I tell, every character I create gets filtered through the lens of my personal biography, he continued, his voice breaking with emotion. I can't write about love without people assuming I'm lonely. I can't write about death without people assuming I'm suicidal. I can't write about family without people digging into my relationship with my parents. Authors have always drawn from their personal experiences, Hoda tried to interject. But Brandon whirled around and pointed at her. And there it is again, he screamed. Even now, even after everything I've just explained to you, you're still doing it. You're still reducing my work to autobiography. Do you not understand that fiction exists? Do you not comprehend that writers are capable of imagination? The studio was in chaos now. Camera operators unsure whether to keep filming, producers frantically debating whether to cut the feed, and crew members staring in fascination and horror at the complete meltdown happening before their eyes. Brandon, you need to calm down. Hoda's voice was shaking now, clearly rattled by the intensity of his breakdown. We can take a break. We can end the interview. Oh, now you want to end it? Brandon laughed hysterically. Now that you've gotten exactly what you wanted, now that you've pushed me far enough to give your viewers the show they really came for? This is perfect for you, isn't it, Hoda? This is the real story you were after all along. I never wanted this, Hoda said quietly. And for the first time in the interview, she sounded genuinely shaken. Didn't you, though? Brandon's voice was hoarse now from shouting. Didn't you keep pushing and pushing even when you could see I was getting upset? Didn't you keep digging even when I asked you to stop? Because this moment right here, this is what morning television is really about, isn't it? It's not about books or art or creativity. It's about breaking people down for entertainment. Brandon walked over to the coffee table where his book was displayed and picked it up, holding it like he was considering throwing it. You want to know what this book is really about, Hoda? It's about the death of privacy. It's about living in a world where nothing is sacred, where every emotion is content, where every personal struggle becomes public property. It's about people like you who think they're entitled to every piece of someone's soul just because they're successful. He set the book down gently, his rage suddenly replaced by exhaustion. I wrote that book as a warning, he said quietly. And here we are living in it. The studio fell silent except for the sound of Brandon's heavy breathing and the mechanical whir of cameras that were still rolling, capturing every moment of the most explosive interview breakdown in morning television history. We're going to cut to commercial, Hoda finally managed to say, her voice barely steady. Good, Brandon replied, pulling off his microphone and dropping it on the floor. Because I'm done. What did you think of this incredible breakdown? Was Brandon justified in his reaction, or did he take things too far? And what do you think really triggered his explosive response? Was it just the interview questions, or something deeper? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more breakdowns of the most shocking moments in television history.